Thank you for tuning in again. My name's Andrew, and today we're talking to Doug Frost, MSMW. Man, I was excited to talk to Doug. I still remember meeting Doug when I did the advanced course in Texas way too many years ago. Super awesome guy. You would never know that he is one of 5 people to ever have passed both exams. He is so humble, he's so friendly, and oh man, I still studied in advance of this because I'm still afraid of getting something wrong or misspeaking in front of this guy. It's super fun. We get to talk about his winery and what, starting a winery is like during a worldwide pandemic. We get to kind of just talk about tequila and mezcal and really just discuss what it's like to not jump down every rabbit hole, and it was fun. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Here's Doug Frost. I wanted to jump right in, so I thought it'd be interesting for our listeners today. We got Doug Frost here. You're listed by several sources as probably the person who knows more about alcohol and alcoholic beverages than anyone in the world. And I was wondering, is there any rabbit hole that even you haven't gone down? Something that's too nerdy for you?
Oh, yeah. No, way too many. I mean, I have never taken the time to work on Cicerone certification, which is the beer certification. When it was first getting created, I interacted with the guys who created it, and there was a moment there where I was like, "Hey, I think I should do this," and they were like, "Yeah, no, you should be a guinea pig. We're just getting this started." And then I realized, no, I don't have time for that, and I don't want to do a half-ass job. So no,
Sure.
many rabbit holes, many things that I am still fascinated by and certainly want to learn more about. I still need to get on my schedule to get to Jamaica, and learn a bit more about the really funky high ester rums, from places like Hamden Estate and such. I want to go and see that. I want to go and smell that. Is really what I want to do, because I really I enjoy those crazy uh, ancient, maybe not ancient, but those crazy old styles of rum, and think they're really fascinating. I actually, the list is endless. I could go on and on. I've still never been to the country of Georgia, and
Oh, yeah.
that's talk about a gaping hole in my education. I really need to see that, and I understand it's beautiful, and I certainly have had plenty of wines, and they're amazing. In fact, I've got a set of them right over here that I want to get together with some folks here in Kansas City and taste them. So yeah, a million places where I
Yeah.
still
Well,
need to apply time.
yeah, you can't do everything in one life, unfortunately. Yeah.
No, you can't.
No, and I kind of jumped in, but I think it'd be helpful for these listener. So, as I was doing research on you, I really struggled with what I would even present as what you've done in the past. I mean, I kind of settled on, you got your Master Sommelier in 1991, you got Master of Wine 1993. Wine Spectator named you Master of Spirits back in the day. But I'm just going
Yeah.
on and on. I'm like, to talk to someone in the wine space that actually needs their own Wikipedia page, like, how did you get into this and how did you get to the level where you're at? Was it just a slow, steady accumulation of knowledge? Were you always gifted when it came to studying and remembering things? Like, how did you build to the level that you're at? Because I think that'd be really good for the listener.
Well, I certainly just feel fortunate that I had really great mentors from the beginning. People who I interacted with and either worked with or even occasionally worked for, that really set me on a good path and helped me understand. It's a lifelong pursuit, and don't stop, but apply the right behaviors from the get go. I can think of many lessons that I learned early on when I had just become a salesman in the wine and spirits biz, and I had a friend who is one of my dearest friends to this day, but he was my boss at the time, and he heard me say a few things about somebody else's wine, and he said to me, "Be very careful what you say, because you whatever you say, you're gonna have to live with that for the rest of your life, and you never know what you're gonna be selling next week. And
That's a good
so,
point. Yeah.
it became sort of a joke. I remember, because you change jobs or brands leave or what have you, and, going to my customers later on and saying, "Hey, that wine I told you about that was so great last week? Yeah, that sucks." And, so it became like a joke, and that was the only way to deal with, um, uh, you know, openly admitting that, yes, I have a vested interest in making you believe some products are better than others. Let's just go ahead and be transparent about it. And certainly mentors like Mike Corso was my first real boss in the wine wholesale business. Great guy. Look up his wines. Mike Corso Selections is a great import company. Evan Goldstein, who certainly
Oh yeah.
put me
Perfect
in.
pairings and
Yeah,
daring pairings. Like that's a huge
yeah.
book. Yeah.
Evan's just a wonderful guy, and it certainly inspired me through the Master Sommelier program, but put me on some pathways that are still really important to my business today and my work today. I just feel like, take care of the people that you know. You don't know who's going to be able to help you later on. So presume that everybody needs to help everybody, because everybody does need to help everybody. I remember at the beginning of the COVID era, seeing somebody on a plane acting like an asshole. And I literally turned to it and I said, "We're all in this together." And,
Mhm.
I think that's still kind of comes from the restaurant business, because that's where I started when I was 14 years old, washing dishes. Is we're all in this together. We got to get through shift together. We got to make all these customers happy together. We're all going to get, maybe not an era of pooled tips back then, but that was the view that, hey, we got to make all these people happy, and then we're all going to get paid. So let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, no, and it's so important too. I mean, thinking about the, switch around of the different accounts. If you're in distribution now with all the things that are happening with RNDC, you know that half of their
Man,
portfolio is going to all these different companies. And
uh,
it's,
it's
yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
the Wild West right now.
Yeah, it is the Wild West right now, and
Yeah.
truthfully, having been in that industry for a long time, it was always the Wild West. You never really knew what was gonna happen next, and you just had to stay on your toes.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the logical progression of what I think I probably will end up doing someday because eventually closing and getting out of the restaurant at 1 a.m., it does catch up with you if you do it every night, week after week.
Yeah,
So,
it's a young person's game,
yes.
although I've always loved it, and I still
Yeah.
keep those hours, you
Oh,
know,
sure.
it's ingrained into my world, but I just, yeah, doing that night after night. Now what I do, I work with a restaurant in Kansas City, and I maybe work 1 night a month. It's really wrong, but get to work 1 night a month, and more or less, and it's kinda cool, I'll put in my
Yeah.
shift. It's nice and
I mean,
chill.
you get to say you're still in the restaurant industry, right? It's
Boop,
yeah.
boop, air
Uh,
quotes on that one.
yeah. And, on that note, I did want to ask, so as far as I can tell, your primary job at the moment is with Echolands, right? And
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I have
but
a winery, that I co-own with one partner, in Walla Walla, Washington, so I travel back and forth, and, in fact, I'm headed to the airport here shortly to fly back up to Walla Walla. Fortunately, I have a really good staff up there, so when the project started back in 2018, it was me and a winemaker, and, that was rough, but now, I have a general manager, a winemaker who's fantastic, a hospitality director who's really has a much larger role than that. She's fantastic at managing people, tasting room staffed by some wonderful folks who really help. Talk about the wines, imbue hospitality, because hospitality is still, the thing. I'm like, this is what you're here for. It doesn't really matter if they don't drink. To, get them something nice to drink, whether it's flavored water or one of the non-alcohol cocktails. We're not just here to sell wine. We're here to treat people really well, and and make them feel at home, and they'll buy wine. That part will take care of itself.
yeah, especially if you make it well enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is this the first winery that you've been part of? Because I couldn't find any other reference to that. But what has that been
Yeah.
like starting and growing a winery?
Insane, completely
Insane.
insane, particularly because, I love telling people we released our first wines March of 2020. Nothing going on then. What
Yes.
could possibly go wrong? So
Well, that
and
was probably
people
the biggest spike in alcohol consumption of all time. So it's probably the best thing you could have done.
actually, the problem therein lay
Yeah.
that people were going to often grocery stores, not even retail stores, but certainly retail stores that could stay open because people may not recall Washington State was the first state that shut down completely, so we couldn't open a tasting room, and people went to stores or went online to buy wine they already knew. They weren't there. There was no place they could go to discover new wine. People weren't out well, maybe somebody was out there trawling going, well, what have I not heard of? No, they were like, I need to stockpile, I need to stockpile Tanqueray 10 right now,
Yeah.
and I'm going to buy all of the Zabacoster I can possibly find. And I'm going to, drink Riesling until this crap is over. And so we did not benefit from that. We really, really struggled. We sold wine to people that we knew. And so I just did oh my God, here's my Rolodex. I'll call and write and email everybody I know. But it was impossible to actually get in front of somebody's face and pour them the wine, at least for the first year.
Yeah. Were you like mailing out samples? How are you getting around
Yeah,
that? Or
yeah, yeah. We were doing that. We were trying to do the Zoom thing. Let's all taste wine online together,
Mhm.
and so we did that. But it was dreadful timing. It worked out okay in the long run because it let me. In fact, I often believed that COVID kind of saved my butt in so much as I had time to do all the paperwork and the compliance that opening a winery requires, and the registration and following the regulations that selling wine to other states requires. I mean, it's endless paperwork, and
Yeah.
I don't know when I would have done that. I don't know how I would have gotten that done because I was at that time I was on the road with my own work, my own consulting work, over 200, sometimes 250 days a year, and that's just a grind, and all of a sudden it was like, "You're not going anywhere."
0. Yeah.
Yeah, and after, 200 to 250 days a year on a plane, I was down to 0 days on a plane, and that lasted maybe not a year, but it was probably a good 9 months before I got back on a plane, and so I got a lot done, during that time. It was messy, but we got through it.
Yeah. Now, for the uninitiated listener, why is it such a difficulty getting into all the states? So I know, we know, but
Yeah, yeah.
yes. Yeah.
It's that for anyone, certainly anytime I talk to somebody outside the US, I have to explain to them that the US is not a country. It is 50 countries. You are
Mhm.
certainly when it comes to alcohol beverage, people often don't realize prohibition was never actually repealed. What was allowed, each state was allowed to repeal or set its own rules post prohibition. Some states, particularly, when people think about places like Tennessee and states in the South, actually hung on to prohibition for quite some time. Some states cracked it open immediately, but each state set its own rules. So every state has an entirely different set of rules and regulations surrounding alcohol beverage, all of which have certainly been undergoing enormous change over the years as well, because again, each state is allowed to set radically different rules. So you are, well, in some states, let's say like Nebraska, going into Nebraska, I found a wholesaler. They were interested in selling our wines, but I can't sell it to that wholesaler. I have to make an arrangement with a broker, and the broker then sells it. And so I actually am having to appoint and fill out paperwork and create paperwork for two different entities who then have to do the same thing with the Nebraska Alcohol Beverage Control Department. It's samples and fingerprints, and it's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's kind of crazy. It's a bunch of crazy regulatory shit, and just to so I get to stand on my soapbox for a second. Those rules have for many, many years been hijacked, generally speaking, by large wholesalers to their benefit, so that most wineries are not allowed to sell wine in most states. They have to go to a wholesaler. And these days, wholesalers are like, and we were just talking about the RNDC situation. Most wholesalers are like, I don't need a wine. I don't need another winery. There's
Oh,
10,000 or so wineries in the United States. Only a fraction of them get any sort of representation, and therefore cannot sell wine in most states. It's not just a matter of filling out a piece of paper and sending it to the state. You've got to find somebody who will enable you to do that. Let's put it that way.
sure, sure. For that state, yeah. And
Yeah.
the next state over, it's a completely different ball game. And
And sometimes it's different from city to city, within market to market within a state, but generally speaking, you get to do one thing in each state.
for sure. No, yeah, I was going to mention too. So I was born in Texas, and
Oh,
Texas
yeah.
is one of those like county by
Oh, yeah.
county, and I could buy beer. Like if I went to this side of town, it was over the county line, but not this side on Sundays, and it was just a wild west of
It is the
hodgepodge.
Wild West. Actually, another thing about Texas that's pretty hilarious is that you actually have to bond the trucks that are delivering alcohol. So you can't again, you couldn't just open up your own shop, and begin selling wine there. One, that's a violation of the three-tier system, where there's supposed to be separation between the maker and the middleman, the shipper, the distributor, the wholesaler, and the retailer or the restaurateur who actually goes and sells your wine to a customer. But the trucks that deliver it to that restaurant or retail have to be bonded by the state. So it's just more paperwork, more money, more, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask, your work with the Master of Wine program, did that
Mhm.
help you in navigating the wine business? Because I've definitely seen more wine business emphasis on that side, whereas most quartermaster somms people I talk to, it's more the service side. So yeah, it was
Yeah. No, you're very right. The quartermaster sommeliers exams, throughout the layers of those exams, is very much about service, about what happens at tableside. It certainly demands that you understand bigger wholesale, pardon me, bigger um, financial aspects. But it's only when you get into the MW that you would be asked to opine upon ways in which the structure of the wine industry impacts wine and what people see and what people say and all of that. And then within the Master of Wine, within that kind of business of wine paper examinations, you're supposed to understand the wine industry as it is throughout the world, not just in the U.S. It's one of the things that people in the U.S. often struggle with. But conversely, it's one of the things I find kind of fun when someone not living in the U.S. has to write a paper about the U.S. You better know what you're talking about, because it's really, really complicated. It does remind me, though, because every country has its own um, protective, shall we say, protectionist methodologies when it comes to the structure of any regulation, much less alcohol beverage. That many years ago, I heard a gentleman speak about India and India's ways of handling alcohol beverage, and you may have to bleep this one, but because it's a pretty good line. He said, "Look." In India, not only will you have to be appointed and fill out regulatory paperwork to sell wine in India, then you will have to do the same thing to get permission to sell into a single state within India. And then you will have to do the same thing to sell wine within an individual community area within India. And then you will have to do the same thing again to sell wine within an individual city within India, and sometimes a neighborhood. I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the people who brought you the Kama Sutra can fuck you 100 different ways. So, and like I said, you may have to bleep that, but we all realize, well, that's a rehearsed line and it's genius.
yeah, no, that's awesome. um, I am fascinated by the difference between the MSMW. So I once heard a Master Somm joke that MW stands for mostly writing. um, yeah, so like, do you? like, as far as I understand, it is like a long series of written exams, right? There is no oral element to it because I'm only done CMS, so I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah, that's
interesting.
certainly one of the most dramatic differences between the two programs. The MS is once you get to the advanced level or the master's level, it is an oral examination, a verbal and timed examination. The same is true of the MW in that it is timed, but now you're putting pen to paper or these days fingers to keyboards. Back in my day, you literally had to put pen to paper. They were not allowing electronic keyboards of any sort, certainly not computers. And so you have typically 2 hours to look at typically three questions, actually, I should say more like five or six questions. Pick three and write a full on ideally structured and competent essay in response. So, yeah, it's very much about the organization of your thoughts around these individual subjects. And sometimes they're very broad and sometimes they're very narrow. It just depends. And when you turn that exam paper over, you have 2 hours and you've never seen these questions before. So when I am giving people advice about the MW, my point is often that listen, you say you've never seen these questions before. Just use your head. You know the questions that are going to be asked right now. Climate change is going to show up in an exam. So think through already what you think about climate change. The fact that people are drinking less alcohol now is going to be on an exam in some fashion. Decide what you would say, what examples you have of how people are responding to that. That's certainly true of lower alcohol wines because that's a thing today, and non-wine alcohol beverages. That's a thing you're going to be asked to show some knowledge of and fit into a broader argument that may be just something about planting new vineyards. Should people plant new vineyards today, and if so, where? That kind of thing. Because right now people are ripping up. I can't remember the number. I believe it's some crazy number, like a quarter of all the wine grapes in California were not picked last year. So it's these are
But
dramatic times. But
yeah,
when you're an old guy
I'm,
like me, they're all dramatic times.
is that like all the like satellite regions, not the big star names that are, yeah.
Well, no, certainly the star names in places like Napa and Sonoma saw much less of that. But surprisingly, and certainly in a year like 20, when there were fires everywhere, there was a lot of smoke damage. So a lot of grapes in Napa went unpicked. Same is true in 20. A lot of grapes in the Willamette Valley in Oregon, really good, if not great vineyards went unpicked because of smoke damage. So there's all sorts of problems when it comes to how reality intrudes into your best
Yeah.
ideas.
No, no, and I was gonna jump on that, people drinking less too. Now, I saw a report, and I don't remember the number off the hand, but like the next generation, it's almost like a shocking departure from how much they're drinking versus the older generations. Which is it just the times, or are there
Well,
other?
I
Yeah,
think, there's no question that cannabis, has had an impact upon alcohol consumption. In most we certainly, got to see small experiments, in states like Colorado or Washington or Oregon or such, early adopters of cannabis legalization. We got to see what's the impact. And the first thing you saw was alcohol, beverage consumption just drops. And then what we saw is it rose back up again. It never went the same, went at the same level um, as before. Certainly, the alcohol consumption patterns had changed, no question about that. But they didn't necessarily change dramatically forever. But that was cannabis, so that was just uh, um, you know, one of the influences upon people's decision to drink less or drink not at all. Certainly, having the U.S. Surgeon General at the end of the Biden administration say there is no level of alcohol that is safe, which is, I'm sorry, I'm going to call that bullshit. That's based on selective reading of science. There's no question that
Yeah,
immoderate
excessive
consumption of alcohol.
alcohol. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, at the same time, I can raise my hand and go, "Yeah, but you'll survive it," because
Mm,
I am
mm.
living proof, that, there
Sure.
have been immoderate moments in my life, and, that's kinda the industry I got into can be wild and crazy, but, obviously, at some point, I had to learn that, no, I need to model better, behaviors, and if I'm gonna survive, I need to not act like a dumbass. So, that became important, but there's no question that people are asking themselves, "Why am I drinking alcohol in the first place?" And I would
Mm.
definitely argue because it is, if nothing else, a social lubricant, because this is the way in which people, over the history of humans, at least over the last 10,000 years or so, have interacted with each other by finding ways to share stuff together, share food together, and wine is certainly a food. And then with alcohol, we found that it also altered our behaviors with each other, often for the good. Not always. There's famous stories that the great Patrick McGovern writes about. He's an alcohol historian, and I wish I could remember precisely the two groups he talks about, but ancient groups in the Middle East who utilized alcohol beverage in their civilizations, their city states to make decisions. And one group would get roaring drunk, make a decision, and then wake up in the morning and see if it was still a good decision.
Yeah.
And the other group
No, that's
would
the
would make
Herodotus, the Persians.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They would make a
Yeah.
decision, and then they would get roaring drunk and see if they still think it's a great decision when they're drunk. And then I think that sounds really logical. You get a chance to speak more freely, shall we say.
Yeah. No, it's a tale that I see lived out every night at the steakhouse, honestly. Um, and I was thinking too, just go back. This wouldn't be the first time that our drinking patterns as a whole global society have shifted. I'm thinking pre-prohibition to now. I mean, people drink a lot. And I mean, it was also the holdover from an era when it wasn't safe to drink water every time, but
Yeah, no,
it's
particularly, Americans in the 19th century were hard drinkers, and a
Mhm.
lot of that was distilled, alcohol, and it was strong and intense, and people were, for lack of a kinder word, drunk on a regular basis, and it isn't, that isn't healthy. But precisely to your point, people had learned to rely upon alcohol. Certainly, if we go back millennia, we know that alcohol is mixed with water, that the Greeks would never drink straight wine, for instance. They always mixed it at least half wine and half water because it made the water safe to drink. And it meant they could drink more glasses. So they weren't, they weren't afraid of the alcohol. It was more a matter of watering it down so that you can get your water intake, even though alcohol is a diuretic, it's a little self-defeating. Nonetheless, that was the behavior in ancient times, and in the 19th century, particularly Americans were noted for their heavy drinking, and so prohibition was an inappropriate response to a real problem.
Mhm. With all of its own unintended consequences.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So I was wondering, in your opinion, having it be an oral examination versus written, is there one that was easier, or does it just depend on personality type, and you just yeah, I'm
Yeah.
kind of leaving that
I
up there
think
because I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It depends upon your personality type. People who are fast on their feet are in great shape at the Master Sommelier. People who are not able to organize their thoughts in a logical manner and are not practiced, and it always comes back to practiced at either one of those presentations of information are going to be in trouble. And so, the answer is very simple. You practice. And if you've ever worked on a restaurant floor, you've lived that world. You're already there. So for me, having come from restaurants, it was no big deal. in the sense that I was ready kind of for anything, and if somebody asked me a wacky question, I've been asked a million wacky questions. This is just another one that I'm gonna tell people about later on when I'm in the kitchen. It's like, "Oh my
Yes.
god, you wouldn't believe what I just heard." But with the MW, you are practiced at writing essays, and I'd spent a lot of time, in my life writing, was something that I, have always really felt like as part of my being, and so that one was easy, and the fact that I had had so many different roles, whether helping run a retail store, or working the restaurant floor, or helping manage restaurants, or working as a wholesaler, or working as an importer, or being a wine writer, all of those things had been roles that I had lived by the time I came to the MW. So I was like, yeah, this makes
I've got
sense to
this.
me. I just need to get organized.
Sure, sure. Did you intentionally do the MS first just to like get it out of the way, and or was it just coincidental the sequence that you went on? Or
Actually, I did them both at the same time. It just
okay,
takes the MW it takes longer to do the MW than the MS. I don't know what the current number is, but I believe there's still a statistic out there that says the average amount of time it takes to do the MS is 5 to 7 years, and the MW is 7 to 11 years. So I took them both at the same time unintentionally. I didn't even know the MS existed when I jumped into the MW, and then got through, learned about the MS and got through it, kind of in short order. But the MW just takes a little bit longer than the MS. So, even though I was doing at the same time, I finished the MS in 91 and the MW in 93.
yeah. Um, so I did want to actually relay this story because I have a lot of respect for this. You found out about the MS while doing the MW. I heard that story, and then you took the advance and passed it, and and it was
With,
like a two
with the,
week
yeah,
period or
yeah, I
something.
had two
Yeah,
weeks to get ready. Um,
yeah. So
but
so I've been yeah.
I was neck deep, at that point, I was neck deep in the whole
Mhm.
thing, and, my friends and I, blind tasted each other constantly. It was one of those things where I'm sure I got through by the skin of my teeth, no doubt at all, but the minute I got through the advanced, I realized what I didn't know and what I wasn't good at, and knew that it was time to get good at those things.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, I've been working on the advance for years, and I the 2 years ago I passed the theory and service and did not pass blind, and I was like, man, he found out in 2 weeks and went for it. That's impressive.
Well, I
But
also I know this would not make, some MSs happy for me to say this, but the exam's harder today than it was. I know that, everybody does you're supposed to be like, "Scouts Honor, it's exactly the same." No, it's not. The advanced definitely, in my view, has gotten harder over the years, and part of that, was actually good intentions. I remember, when back in the day when I helped with the exams, the view really was that people were taking the advanced and thinking, "Wow, I'm ready for the masters," and then just getting clobbered. And it's expensive to take the masters, and we felt like we need to tighten up the advanced so that people don't finish the advanced and think, "Well, now I'm good to go," because it's like, "Oh, dude, no." It gets really ugly from here. So,
yeah,
I would admit to you that I certainly feel like we felt that we had to make the advanced more consistently, uniformly serious throughout the exam, and it's tough. It's a really tough exam.
it is. It is. It's been the thing that I just keep banging my head against, but I mean, the whole point I think is to have these intense certifications that actually mean something, and if you lower the standards, then what's the point?
Well,
I mean, part of it too is the job I have has a lot of hours, so you
yeah,
know,
yeah, there,
you add up the hours and it only goes to 24. Can't get any higher.
yeah,
So
yeah, you can't squeeze
yeah,
more. However, I would say, on the tasting, bear in mind that it's a finite number of wines, and that the human mind and the sensory equipment can remember things rather amazingly. I mean, almost terrifyingly accurate at remembering sensory experiences. However, we tend to, those of us who prepare, I certainly know I did for the masters. I threw everything against the wall. I was tasting anything and everything, and I was wasting my time. The best methodology is to look at that list of quote unquote testable wines, pick a good example of each one and taste the crap out of it. Because of Coravin and other tools these days, you can taste that wine every day. And when you taste, always taste blind. And the body quickly builds up that sense memory. And okay, yeah, if you're only tasting one example of, let's say, a Vouvray, right? Okay, they could throw a different Vouvray at you, or maybe they're going to throw a Sauvignon at you instead of a Vouvray, which does present very differently. On the other hand, if you've tasted the same Vouvray, I don't know, 50 times over the course of a year, if I push a glass of that to you, you're going to go, "Oh, I know this wine because I've tasted
No,
this a
this seems
million
like
times."
Vouvray.
And
Yeah.
now what'll happen is if it's a different one, you'll smell it and go, well, "This really reminds me of the one, but this is not the one I usually have, but it really, really reminds me of that one." And so I think for so many people, they try to test and prepare themselves for way too many wines, and it's easier if you just stick to the testable list. Don't let amateurs pick your wines when you're blind tasting, because people will pick wines that are out of the the wheelhouse. We always say when we pick wines for the blind tasting exam, these have to be absolute classic examples, nothing weird, nothing different. And so I would encourage you, when you go back for the blind, just to prepare, spend a year doing just that, retasting, 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 and until you're like, If you brought me that glass of Vouvray again, I don't even need to taste it. I smell it and I know, oh yeah, it's this, that's the 4 I've consumed 100 times."
Where I actually get really mixed up in my head. So, you hand me a glass, I smell it, and I can pretty almost be like, oh, that's a Malbec. Like,
Mhm,
oh, that's a Pinot Grigio.
mhm.
But when I start talking out loud, I convince myself, like it's like I'm not listening to myself, and I let the nerves kind of. And I
Yeah.
say nerves are the great question mark.
Yeah, well, there again, I
Yeah.
think practice is your friend. That you go through the steps, the grid, as we say, and the grid is really just a series of questions to make sure that you don't miss anything in that wine. By filling out that grid, you gain points. You By getting the wine right, you've got the points from the analysis and the description of the wine, then you get the wine right, you win. But the idea really is that you don't ignore your brain when it says, "Wow, look at that. The purple on the side, smell that. That smells like Malbec." You go, "Hang on, we don't know it is yet. Let's collect all the data and make sure all the points line up." And now you start talking about, well, there's an enormous amount of color in this wine, including even in the legs. There's a lot of bright purple to it. Okay, it's a heavily pigmented grape. Let's move on. The alcohol, you start collecting notes of oak, alcohol, collecting notes of fruits and herbs, and yada yada yada. And then you put all the kind of data in front of you, and you go, actually, no, that's not a Malbec. That's just a Zinfandel. But it's okay that the first thing I thought was Malbec, because Zin and Malbec can kind of act like each other. And here's why it's a Zin: because there was a touch of American oak, and typically Malbec's not found in Argentina. Or pardon me, American oak is not used on Malbec in Argentina. So just that one data point kept me in the right zone and not in the wrong zone. So it is that you don't lose that ability to go, "Is that Malbec?" Because, probably a third of the time, you're dead on. You got it right. Your brain already said, "Hey, I know what this is."
Yeah. No, and because I went to college in New Mexico, so Tim Geyser, big out
Uh,
there, and he calls them the evil dwarves. And so yeah, it's super easy that first smell. It's like, oh, I thought it was Grenache, but maybe as you start
yeah.
going through all the laterals and
Oh, I love it.
yeah.
Tim is an old and dear friend. He and I kind of went through the program together, although it really is just, we didn't know each other at the time, but we both took the masters at the same time. And it was really funny. There was a kind of California mafia that was involved in, I mean, I called them that, that was taking the exam. And I don't know that I wasn't well liked, but I was definitely not one of them. I was just some knucklehead from Kansas City, and a couple of them were, downright rude to me, just because they were like, "What does this idiot know? He's from Kansas City. What could he possibly, he can't pass."
Missouri? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Gazer was, Tim was one of the guys who was like, "Oh no, this guy and I totally are simpatico." And a lot of people don't know this about Tim. Back in this is now we're talking about the early 80s. Tim was involved in spirits and cocktails, or at least more knowledgeable than most of our peers were. I was very involved in that as well. But Tim and I could sit there and talk cocktails and talk spirits, and all the other MS candidates were like, "What are you guys talking about? Well, why would you even drink that stuff?" I'm like, "Because if you haven't had mezcal, you're a fool."
Yeah. No. I think some mezcals are probably my favorite moment. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah, this. I mean,
mezcal's
that
amazing.
whiskey. Yeah, I'm pretty equal opportunity though.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, me too. I kind of love everything.
I actually am glad that you mentioned spirits because I did want to ask you the beverage alcohol
Yeah.
resource. That is actually where I first got introduced to your name way
Oh,
back in the day because I was a bartender by trade back in the
oh,
day. But
cool. Yeah.
yeah, could you tell us the listeners a little bit about that because that was huge. Yeah.
Yeah, well, certainly, one of my, erstwhile business partners is a guy named Steve Olson. Steve lives in New York. Um, Steve and I met through the Master Sommelier program. In fact, we roomed together, at the first time that he and I and our friends Bob Bath and, a whole group of people were all taking the masters for the first time in Monterey, California. And Steve and I immediately were like, "Dude, you and I are, on the same wavelength." And because if only because we were both involved, or at least spent a lot of time tasting and drinking spirits and cocktails as well. And so subsequently, Evan Goldstein, again, one of my mentors, really in the Master Sommelier program, he was running something called the Sterling School of Service and Hospitality for Sterling Vineyards, owned by Chateau and Estates, which is owned by Seagram Company. So deep pockets, and he ran this wine educational school. And they asked him, because they were Seagram, they asked him to create a spirits educational school, and he was like, "Not my wheelhouse." But Frost and Olson are the two guys I think could do this, and Steve and I were like, "Hell yeah, let's do this!" And so we put together, literally, we stayed up all night and wrote out a script for a 1-day school, and took you know took a shower, got in our nice clothes, and went and talked to the suits and presented this 1-day program, which became Sterling School of Service and Hospitality for spirits and cocktails. And so we did that for a while. I cleaved it off and did something for Disney World for a while, and that kind of the spirits education diploma thing. And then in the mid '90s, Paul Packold was running the San Francisco spirits competition, which still exists today, although Paul doesn't run it anymore. Um, Paul was running that. Dale DeGroff was there, who I had known for years and years because one of my high school buddies from Central Kansas ran the nightclub at the Rainbow Room in New York City. So I'd met Dale that way, and through other folks. I had never met David Wondrich, but the spirits writer at the time for Esquire and Playboy, and we were all together, the five of us, all as judges at the San Francisco International Spirits Competition. And Paul said, "Let's all go get a drink and talk about something." And he and David had been talking about this idea. And Steve and I were like, "Dude, we already did this, and we've already got the script ready to go. We got the exam, we got the format, we got everything good to go." So we wrapped that all up. And so about 20 years ago, we then turned it into, initially it was just something smaller, and we did it kind of for fundamentals in bartending and things like that, and spirits education. And then about 20 plus years ago, we created what's called Bar 5 Day, which is this overarching big version of that. It's a 5 day program, and it's at a much higher level. And having people like Dale, and David and Paul and Steve, but then supplemented by Andy Seymour, who became our logistics genius, basically, and then having all these other people who took that first 5 day program and subsequently became teachers within the program, such that now we have about 28 different members of faculty. Over half are female. About a third of persons of color. We reflect better now. I think our audience, when really it was a program that was started by five old white guys, and we weren't
Yeah.
old then, but we're old now. And and that program, I love that program, and have always really enjoyed those 5 days with 60 or 70 bartenders from around the world, or bar managers, or sometimes, bar ambassadors or spirits ambassadors, who all get together, and we do these 14-hour, 16-hour days. And, it's go, 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 go. And we blind taste something like 190 spirits, and 30 or so cocktails. And it's amazing. It's a really cool
Yeah.
program.
And for the listener out there that may be familiar with blind tasting wine versus blind tasting spirits and cocktails, because you do that a little less,
Yes.
let me tell you, it's a lot harder than you think. I
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
you can get in your head and you can definitely make yourself think something besides what's in front of you.
It's always possible to do that if you're under stress and under the gun to come up with the name of, that spirit category. You're always going to be jumping to conclusions, often
Mhm.
coming up with ideas as to what this is before you should. Because initially it's just collect the data. What's it smell like? What's it taste like? Check for all the categories. Theoretically, once you've collected all that information, it's going to be really obvious. This isn't a cognac. It just smelled wonderful and almondy and nougaty and a little chocolate and a little walnut, and had this beautiful honeyed note to it. And you thought it was a cognac initially because it smelled so lovely, but it's just an old rum. And you knew that
Yeah.
because it had a certain kind of marshmallow note that was lingering there, or it had a kind of funky, slightly sweaty smell. Cognac never has a sweaty smell, but rum sometimes smells a little bit like humans.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah. As I think about, yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, so, it really comes back
Yeah.
to collect all the data, and then you'll know.
When you're at home, what's your go-to drink? Do you have one category that you're like, I am mezcal or I'm
Oh, yeah.
cognac
I
or
I actually do carry a small little vial of mezcal with me wherever I go,
oh
because,
yeah.
yeah, I love mezcal. But when it comes to, certainly when it comes to wine, I'm all over the place. It really is
Mhm.
dependent upon the time of day, the place where I'm at, what I'm interested in learning about, and certainly the weather. In the dead of summer, I'm
Mhm.
probably not drinking Amarone, okay? It's just like it's frickin' 100 degrees out there and 90% humidity. Are you out of your flipping mind? Let's bang out the German Rieslings, make them nice and cold, 8% alcohol. We're good.
Yeah. No, I admire and live off the money that the people in the steakhouse come and spend on cabs in the middle of summer, but I could never do it. I'm a beer guy in summer. I just yeah. When it gets cold, bring on the heavy reds.
Yeah,
I am
yeah.
down.
Bring me the
Yeah.
cold stuff. You're 100% right.
Yeah. I actually want to show you something. So see if you can see this.
I
Oh,
can.
am I
I can't
yeah.
really read it because of the reflection. I can't read the
Yeah, so it's Ray Silva, Mezcal Ancestral.
cool.
So no idea what it's like. I picked it up in Mexico at a little tour shop. I have been a little slow to open it because I was quoted a price of 400 pesos and they charged me $400. So it turned into a nightmare to get my money back. So now it's just this like relic of that one fun story of this $20 little bottle turned into a $400 bottle.
They tried to take
Yeah.
you for an extra 380.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
I still
amazing.
remember saying pesos, right? Pesos? It is. Oh yes, pesos. It's like great. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, the wonderful thing about, Mexican Spirit is it's supposed to have a nom on there, you're supposed to be able to look on the back, see the NOM, the nom number, and that will then lead you can go online and discover what distillery actually made that. Often a distillery that makes other products, and so you can kinda compare products across the board. Certainly when people bring me, as so often happens, a new mezcal or a new tequila, and they're like, "This is amazing. This is one of it's handmade." And it's like, "Uh-huh, it's made by, let's see the nom. Okay, I'll look that up. Yeah, the guy makes 35 other brands." You know, and so it ain't that special, but it doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
not, delicious. But Ancestral, of course, is this whole category of the, utilization of that it is far more likely to be handmade, because you've ground up the mega, and utilize fibers and things like that, an ancient still, that it's far more likely to be handmade than a mezcal industrial, which will never really
Yeah.
be something you probably wanted to drink. So
At some point, I will have to just open up because I
yeah,
also have wondered, like, is this even mezcal? Yeah, I mean, it was just a random shop on the side of the road, but
sure, yeah, no,
yeah, which yeah,
it,
it could be amazing. You never know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, as I say, you might be able to find out more about who made it, and it's always interesting. I'm always interested in tasting something new because you just find stuff in places you don't expect it, both good and
Mhm.
bad. I've always pushed people to blind taste spirit as well because I can remember a couple of instances where I tasted a famous rye brand, and I was blind tasted on this rye brand, 3 different bottles purchased in 3 consecutive years, and there were 3 different rye whiskeys. I mean, very different. And my friend who blinded me on them was like, "This is that brand this year, that brand last year, and that brand the year before." And they had been sold, and it was like, "Oh my god, they're throwing completely different juice in there." And it's not at the standard it should be. And so I did that with other people subsequently as well. I was like, got a blind tasting for you. And there'd be like 3 different brands here, 3 different, whiskeys. I'm like, "No, they're not." And then conversely, I've had that experience and where somebody poured a blind tequila on me that is not a tequila brand that I would ever have taken seriously. And it wasn't great, but I was like, but this is a relatively quality, it's Valley Floor agave. It's, maybe a little bit sweet, but actually I think there's some really nice character in this. And they pulled the bag off and I'm like, "Whoa." You know,
Oh,
but I wouldn't have
yes.
even taken the time to do that. But which is why blind tasting is so useful to acknowledge that even, some of these large scale brands that people don't take seriously, they're trying to make good juice. So it's good to acknowledge that when that happens.
Yeah, and you open up the world too. There's, the more things that you like, the more things you like, and you don't have to always spend all that money if it's something that's more affordable. And yeah,
Damn straight. We
yeah,
are all
yeah.
looking to save money where we can.
I know. After 2020, we all
Yeah.
tightened the belt a little
Yeah.
bit. um, well, awesome. Doug, there's one other thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to let you go because I know you got a big trip later today. Why do you think only 4 people have ever done the MWMS? Is it just that it's so hard to do one that the overlapping circle is that small, or
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, that's one of the explanations. I think that probably the truthful explanation is more pragmatic, that for most people, you get one, you're good. You got
Mm,
that those postnominals, and that lets people know you're serious and you've worked hard and you studied and you have gathered a lot of information and mastered a good chunk of that information. So the need to have both is only a few of us are insecure enough to need both, you know. And like I said, mine was an
Yeah.
accident. I expect there will be more. I mean, my, you know, I wasn't the first guy. The first guy was Ron Wiegand in '91, and then me in '93, and then Gerard Basset in, I think it was '99 or 2000, and then Eric Keemer about 5 years later, and now Benjamin Haskell passed last year. He lives in,
Oh, I didn't hear that one.
yes, he
Oh, I'll
lives
have
in,
to start saying 5 now. Yes.
no, Gerard passed away about 5 years ago, and a great loss because he was an amazing person. And so there remained just four of us. But Benjamin, it's really funny. When I heard he had passed, I was like, dude, you need to, you know, shout it from the rooftops. He was like, yes, yes, I'm fine. I'll see what I want to do. You know, he's just like, I'm in Singapore. I'm gonna take it easy, bro. And he's obviously very skilled, and there will be more. There will definitely be more.
Awesome. Well, Doug, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. Thank you. I didn't say it earlier. You taught my agave spirits class in the advanced course when I did it. So thank you for
Oh,
doing
right
such a
on.
good job. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. That's one of those, you know, talk about a a seminar I love to teach. You know, it's one
Yeah.
of
It's been
more
about,
one of
I
those
think it was
somebody's
12,
like, you
15
need to get off
years.
the stage now, you know.
Yeah. I think it's so smart that they put that at the end of the day because throughout the whole day, you're doing all these tastings of wine and everyone's spitting. And then at the very last of the day, last course, it's agave spirits. Everyone's exhausted. And it's like, this is it. So you see some people stop spitting as religiously towards it. Yeah.
As they
Well,
should. It's
yeah.
time to chill out a little bit.
Where could the listener find you? Where can they find more about Echolands and all the things you do?
Well, certainly Echolands, winery.com is where our website is. We're in about 13 states or so, so our wines are not impossible to find, depending upon where you are. But we're a relatively small winery. We're making about 9,000 cases a year now, so we're not tiny anymore. But certainly, if you get to Walla Walla, and I encourage people to check out the town of Walla Walla, there's like 200 wineries there now. It's really cool, and there's some great restaurants, and it's a cool little town. And if you make it there, you need to come up and visit us because we have this high elevation winery with a 360 view of the entire valley, and it's just gorgeous up there.
That's awesome. It's a place so nice they named it twice, so you
As they
gotta go.
say, as they
Yeah.
say.
Well, for everyone listening, if you didn't record that, I will have in the show notes where you can find more about Echo Winery. And thank you for coming on, Doug. It was a real
But
pleasure.
thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening. That's the end of our show today. My name's Andrew. This is Serves You Right. If you haven't, please subscribe to the show. Everyone who subscribes helps this show grow and get cooler guests on, and it sure does mean a lot to me. We put out new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. We'll see you then. Thanks.